Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. And if you've been hiding in a swamp today, or you are feeling a bit boggly, then get ready, because we're about to talk about the Kruleboyz faction pack that has been released. We are going to look at all of the rules in detail and try to work out exactly the way the units are going to work and how they're going to be effective and what role they're going to play in your army. This is going to be the first of many videos that I'm going to make about the Kruleboyz. We're going to do tier lists of the units. We're going to look at points and lists and a bunch of other stuff. But right now, we're going to be looking at each one of those units in detail and trying to see how we feel about them, what the allegiance abilities do, how the spell laws are going to work, and generally just work out how the army works. I'm doing this while I'm streaming live on Twitch. We have these big, long conversations, and then they're condensed down into these informative videos, which I hope you appreciate. And if you do like them, then do leave any comments about the video down below so I can find out everything that you think about this army as well. And obviously, like, subscribe. And if you really want to, you can join the Honest Wargamer Patreon, where we have a really active Discord talking about Age of Sigmar, and we have a faction-specific chat for every single faction, which is super nice. And because it's a paid Discord, generally you don't have to deal with people who are a little bit whatever. Anyway, let's jump straight in and talk about the Kruleboyz battle traits. So your battle traits are the special rules that are going to apply to your army, and they define this unique playstyle that you're going to have versus how other armies play. And let me tell you, if you're a Kruleboyz fan, I think you're going to be super excited about exactly how these work, because they seem incredibly impressive to me. So the Kruleboyz battle traits are all focused around dirty tricks. And the passive about dirty tricks is that your army can use one dirty trick ability per phase, so that's every phase. The effect of a dirty trick, and phases are broken up into things like hero phase, movement phase, charge phase, shooting phase. That's what phases are, right? The effect of a dirty trick ability is only applied if you make a successful dirty trick roll, which means you are going to need a dirty trick dice. It's just a normal D6, but you've like scribbled obscenities on it, I think. The success of a dirty trick roll depends on the number of dirty trick abilities your army's already used this battle round. So the more you try to use your allegiance ability, the more difficult it is to use your allegiance ability, which is kind of fun. So the first time you do a dirty trick, it's on a 2. The second time you do a dirty trick, it's a 3, then a 4, then a 5. And then every dirty trick after that is consistently at 5, which is pretty spicy in my opinion. Okay. So what dirty tricks can you do? Well, in the hero phase, and only in your hero phase, and only once, you can pick a friendly Kruleboyz infantry unit to be the target, then make a dirty trick roll. Until the start of your next turn, the target's attack score critical hits on unmodified hit rolls of a 5. Critical hit is where you would make a successful roll of a 6, and it will do something. Maybe it will do auto wounds, maybe it will do mortal damage, any of those things. Kruleboyz infantry is a keyword for a type of unit which you can find at the bottom of their war scrolls. All of Age of Sigmar is worked around keywords, which you can find located at the bottom of war scrolls on individual units. You can also see this ability itself has got its own keyword there, dirty trick. Okay, so I feel like this is good, especially because this lasts until the start of your next turn. So it's not just for this turn, like your Sylvaneth or something, and instead it's until the start of the next turn. So this means you can charge in, do all your abilities, and your opponent can charge you, like use your critical 5s, then your opponent charges in, and then you're still doing critical 5s, which is great. Okay, so in the movement phase, and this is in any movement phase, so including your opponents, you can pick a friendly Kruleboyz infantry unit that has 10 or fewer models and is not in combat to be the target. If you're successful, you remove the target from the battlefield and set it up again wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature and more than 9 inches from all enemy units. This is quite fun, because it's done in the movement phase, which means you're going to be able to move a unit out before it gets charged, which is pretty nice. I really like that. You're also going to be able to teleport around units that can do some good shooting and get them into a position around a piece of line of sight blocking terrain, as an example, or maybe even to threaten some faction terrain or some units at the back of the board. Okay. And next up is Lethal Surprise, which is done in any charge phase, and it's super strong. You pick an enemy unit that charged this turn and is in combat with any friendly Kruleboyz units to be the target, then make a dirty trick roll. You inflict D3 mortal damage on the target in addition for the rest of the turn, and the target's weapons cannot be affected by the charge +1 damage. I've said a few times on a couple of these faction reviews that I feel charge +1 damage is going to be very, very effective because it's got a lot of economy of scale. You're seeing units of 5 knights or even upgraded to 10 knights who've got, 3-ish attacks. So what you're doing is you're adding +1 damage to a lot of attacks, which is really nice. And because cavalry units generally are fast, and generally those are the ones that get +1 damage on the charge, they're also more likely to be constantly charging. So being able to shut this down is really nice. This is also going to work in conjunction with with counter charge. So if your opponent charges into your unit, you could even just counter charge into them and do it, if that makes sense, and make it so you're reducing that damage one if you've got more of a glass cannon unit, which is quite spicy. Obviously, they'll charge into a unit already, so you can just roll on those, but it means you can bring another unit in, which normally you don't want to hit those damage on. You could, because it will be in your turn, you can actually stack which way round you want to do it. There's some fun stuff there, but this is going to be really devastating, especially in the game right now where it might be all about charging units. And the last one, Noisy Racket, is done in any combat phase where you pick an enemy unit in combat with any friendly Kruleboyz units to be the target, then make a dirty trick roll. The target has Strike Last for the rest of the turn, which is amazing. You love Strike Last. Strike Last is great. Strike Last is specifically better than Strike First in some cases because it means multiples of your units can strike last, and multiples of your units can strike them because they're striking last before you strike first, if that makes sense. You have an amazing set of allegiance abilities. Sure, they're based on dice rolls, but these are bonuses to your army, and these bonuses are all going to be consistently usable across the entire game. All 5 turns, these are going to be applicable, even if you're down to your last model, and some of these are going to be clutch and get you out of dodge, and some of them are going to win you the game, and that's a perfect set of allegiance abilities to me. Next up on your army list, you are going to choose one of these 4 battle formations. These are going to dictate how your army is going to play, or give you an additional buff, really. Not necessarily super dictate, but give you an additional buff to your army, and there are 4 to choose from. The first one is my favourite straight out the bat. It's Kruleboyz Claw, and you get the passive Swamp Shroud, where friendly Kruleboyz units that are wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature are not visible to enemy units that are more than 12 inches away from them. The reason that I really like this is because if your opponent can't see you, they can't do certain things. Shooting is a good example, but even spellcasting becomes a problem. And there are some other good abilities here, but this one feels really nice for me personally because you are going to be able to engender a way for your opponent to be able to do less only through the movement phase. You don't need to roll a dice or do anything else. However, the wholly within 3 is tough. Definitely, especially as you need to be on objectives to capture objectives. I think that's really fair, but I really like this one. The next one is Far Killer Bolts, which is from the middle finger battle formation, and the Far Killer Bolts ability lets you pick up to 3 friendly Man-Skewer Boltboyz or Beast-Skewer Killbow units, For the rest of the turn, you add 3 inches range characteristics of the target's ranged weapons. That's honestly not bad, especially because you can choose 3 Man-Skewer Boltboyz, and you can reinforce those units. They come in units of 3, you can reinforce them to units of 6, which means 3 lots of 6 for a total of 18. All with plus 3-inch range to their weapons is nice, but maybe the enemy will just be close enough, and definitely as the game progresses, the enemy will be close enough. So this becomes probably less effective as the game goes on. Lightfinger is a passive. Lightfinger gives you a passive called Dead Sneaky, where you can use the sneaking dirty trick ability twice per turn instead of only once per turn. That is the ability that lets you teleport around the board as long as you're not in combat. And because it's twice per turn, that means 4 times over a battle round. The thing to remember, though, with this ability is that it's predicated on a dice roll. The first time you do it will be a 2+, the second time a 3+, 4+, and then eventually there'll be 5+. You also have really good other abilities where you'll be doing crit hits on 5s and making your opponent have strike last, and I probably would be reserving my rolls for that versus teleporting all over. Well, sorry, attempting to teleport all over. And lastly, you've got Trophy Finger, which as a battle formation, which gives you the passive Meanest Beasts, where companion weapons used by friendly Kruleboyz units have crit 2 hits. This is not bad, especially if you're looking to do a more monster heavy army, because lots of the mounts are companions and they have companion based weapons, so making them have what we call exploding 6s is really nice, but that is based on having certain units. So I like all of these, but the one that feels like the most obviously good is the Kruleboyz Claw. But let me know what you would think about the different battle formations. On your army list, you also get to choose a free heroic trait for one of your heroes. It does not have to be your general, which is what it used to be in Age of Sigmar 3. There are 3 to choose from, and these go on one of your heroes. First one is Egomaniac, where you pick, this is obviously going to go on a hero, and the effect is, while this unit is within the combat range, so 3 inches, of a friendly non-hero Kruleboyz infantry unit, this unit has a 4+ ward save. Each time you make a successful ward roll for this unit, you allocate 1 damage point to a friendly non-hero Kruleboyz infantry unit, so hopefully some Hobgrots, or at worst, one of your Kruleboyz units. And within this unit's combat range, after the damage sequence, this unit's been resolved, ward rolls cannot be made. So basically, if you make a successful ward save with this guy, you pass a mortal damage off onto an infantry unit that's nearby that isn't going to be able to make ward saves itself. So, you know, pretty good for helping a model stay survivable. The next one, Backstabber, is done at the end of any turn. You pick an enemy hero in combat with this unit and another friendly Kruleboyz unit. You inflict D3 mortal damage, and for every other Kruleboyz unit that's in combat with it, except the first two that you needed to be in combat with it to make it happen, you get to add one to that D3 mortal wounds. So in order to make this happen, at the end of a turn, I need to be in combat with a hero that I've already been trying to kill. I need to have survived. I need to be in combat with at least 2 units that are alive, and then more if I want to make it spike, and then I'll just do D3 mortal damage. It's too many situations for me to care, so I don't like that. The next one is Slippery Scumbag, which is done in any combat phase, which is great. And the effect of this is, if this unit is in combat, you roll a dice on a 3-up, it can immediately use the retreat ability as if it were your movement phase without any mortal damage being inflicted. So you can do a ton of really interesting stuff with this. Number one, you can just put this on a character you never want to be fought, like a Shaman, as an example. You do not want that to happen, so there you go. What you could also do is put this on a big monstrous fighting character that's planning on charging into units, maybe using the retreat ability to then pop somewhere else on the board, and then possibly be doing a counter charge later, which is also, in my opinion, really spicy. You could be doing a counter charge to get into a position to again roll somewhere else. Or lastly, you could again be using it as a defensive ability for if your big fighty character gets charged and isn't going to get to activate that turn. Because it's an ability that you use in the combat phase, you're going to be able to use your rampage and then be able to use this, because you'll be able to do the rampage on your war scroll in the combat phase and then this ability, because you can choose in any order you want to do them when you're able to do stuff, which is great. So that's a great one in my opinion, and I think Egomaniac's also good. Also, on your army list, one of your heroes gets to take one of these Artefacts of Power. There are 3 to choose from, and they're all great. They're all really good. So one of your heroes can have the Eye Biter Ash, which lets you, once per battle in any combat phase, pick an enemy unit in combat with this unit and then subtract 1 from hit and wound rolls for attacks made by that target. That's really good, especially if you're playing against a singular big, scary unit. However, I really like the Mork's Eye Pebble, which, once per battle, lets you make a reaction to your opponent declaring an attack ability, and then for the rest of the turn, friendly Kruleboyz units have a 5-up ward save while they're holding within 12 inches of this unit. So this does mean you could build a big front screen, and then you can either give everyone within 12 inches a 5-up ward, or you could make one specific unit -1 to hit, -1 to wound. Both of them are once per battle, which and both are very effective. I think it depends on which sort of army you're playing against as to which is probably better, but I feel like the 5-up ward save is probably the strongest one out of the two. However, the last one is also great. The Swamp Staff is gives a passive ability to a hero where, if this unit is not a wizard, it can use Unbind ability as if it had wizard level 1, which is good. But otherwise, add 1 to this unit's power level, +1 to its power level, which means if you've already got a level 1 wizard, you could be a level 2 wizard, which means you're as strong as a Lord of Change, which is quite upsetting for me, but is really good if you're a Kruleboyz player. In your Kruleboyz army, you're going to get to choose a spell lore. Only one, and it's this. Lore of the Swamp, for those who love a good bit of mud. And you have 3 spells, all of them are great. The first one is cast on a 5, and it's called Da Black Pit. Now, a thing to say about spell laws, because some of you people don't know how spell laws work, is when you choose a spell law, each one of the wizards in your army can cast any spell from the spell law. Once in your hero phase, you've tried to cast any of those spells, like Choking Mist or Mork's Cunning, you can't cast them again in your hero phase. But if it's got the unlimited keyword, like the Black Pit, which is cast on a 5, every wizard in your army can attempt to cast this in your hero phase, and you can always use a command ability in your opponent's turn to attempt to cast one of these spells as well. So this spell lets you pick an enemy unit that is within 18 inches, not wholly within 18 inches, and that's great, because what you do is you roll dice for each model in the target unit. For each 6, you inflict 1 mortal damage on the target. Obviously, this is super effective when the enemy unit has lots of models in, for instance, 40 stabbers or something. You know, you're going to get to roll a lot of dice. But actually, because they've got a lot of models, they don't really care about losing 2 or 3 to some mortal damage. Where it gets quite spicy is just even popping this on a unit of like 6 Varangians Vanguard, you know, you should pop a Mortal Wound on them. You might pop a couple and spike well, which is nice. And that is going to be quite effective, mortal damage, sorry, on those units. So I think it's a pretty nice unlimited spell with a really low casting value. The next spell, Choking Mist, is cast on a 7, and you pick a friendly Kruleboyz Wizard, and then you pick an enemy unit wholly within 18 inches of that unit, and you subtract 1 from the attacks characteristic of the target's weapons, which is pretty nutty. I didn't want to go into this too much. We'll talk about this in other videos, but there's also seasonal rules, at least at time of recording this, which is the beginning of Age of Sigmar 4.0 as we know it, and you're able to reduce enemy attacks characteristics down another way as well. So there's that stacking ability. But that's really nice, whatever the situation. And then lastly, Mork's Cunning, which is cast on a 6. You pick a visible, friendly Kruleboyz unit holding in 12 inches of them. Until the start of your next turn, you add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target that friendly unit. That's obviously a great spell, especially if you use in conjunction with that once per battle ability to be able to get a 5-up ward save. But even if you're not doing that, being able to combine +1 to save and then being able to cast more spells because you've got that artifact for casting 2 spells is really legit. It doesn't say in here, but in your army list, you're also going to be able to choose a manifestation lore. Kruleboyz don't have their own unique manifestation. Instead, you can choose one of the generic manifestations. And when we get to the list writing videos, we'll talk about which of those manifestations we think are most useful to bring into a Kruleboyz army. But don't forget, you are able to write a manifestation. You are able to take a manifestation lore for free, like you can take a spell lore for free. Therefore, having wizards in your army is probably going to be more important, and being able to have a level 2 is super good. So great spell lore, able to take manifestations, a way to buff a wizard. Good start for a good army. The first unit that we're going to look at is the titular character of the Kruleboyz, Gobsprakk, the Mouth of Gork. It's a level 2 wizard, which is kind of an anti-wizard in many ways. It's got 14 health with a 5-up save, and has got a control value of 5 like most monsters, and moves 12 inches. So it can be very mobile, and that control value of 5 is going to make it great for holding objectives in conjunction with some of the other units and providing support. The 5-up save is a little bit of a worry in conjunction with its 6-up ward save that it has, in that I don't feel like it's going to be a frontline fighting unit like you would see from some other level 2 fighters, like a Great Unclean One or a Keeper of Secrets, and and very much has that same feeling of a Lord of Change, where it can do something in melee and it's got enough wounds but it doesn't look that survivable. Either way, it's a 2-cast wizard, and its anti-cast is the thing that we'll talk about first. Because it's got a passive, Mork Says No, where each time this unit unbinds a spell, you inflict D3 mortal damage on the caster. And if the unbinding roll was a 10+, you inflict D6 mortal damage. This is pretty spicy, in my personal opinion, because you're going to be able to shut down their wizards maybe very aggressively. In addition, once per battle, as a reaction, you can do the Screaming Mandrake, where this unit uses the Unbind ability, but the unbinding roll is 3d6 instead of 2d6. So that means once per battle, you are at least going to definitely be able to shut down an enemy spell. Oh, well, I mean, hopefully, and maybe do d6 mortal damage to them in the process, which I love. And I think that's really good. Sure, it's not necessarily the best thing. One of the things to say about this, which I think is really spicy, is the ability now, the command ability in Age of Sigmar 4 for your opponent to cast a spell in your turn. This means that you might save the ability to do the 3d6 unbind in the turn in which they're casting this kind of unique spell in your turn. And that's quite a nice new addition for this model to be able to do. But ultimately, I really wish he had the ability to just unbind as many times as possible, or even make a 3d6 unbind once per turn. I think that would be more effective, to be honest. Either way, that's at least what you can do so far. The next thing to talk about is the fact that this unit is a wizard means it's got its own unique spell, as well as access to the spell lore we talked about earlier. That spell is called Strangle Hex, and it's cast on a 6. You pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches, which is a pretty big range in Age of Sigmar 4, and then roll a number of dice equals the target's health characteristic to a maximum of 10. For each 4+, you inflict a mortal damage on the target. This obviously works better on monsters, but is capped, obviously, at 10. So 5 mortal damage at range to a monster, and then being able to cast it in your opponent's turn and cast it again feels quite nice. I'd say a low casting value of 6, big long range, I think that that's not too bad as a spell. And lastly, once per turn in your army, any combat phase, you can do a rampage. Pick an enemy unit in combat and you roll dice. If the roll exceeds the target's health characteristic, one model in the target unit is slain, which is statistically, oddly, better than a Mega Gargant who has to roll, I think, double over a unit's health characteristic. Either way, killing an enemy model is pretty spicy because you could even kill some 5-wound heroes or something similar. A 5-wound cavalry unit would be fun. This unit is also a unique unit, so you can only have one of them, and there's also a War Master. Therefore, if it is in your army, it is a general, unless there's another War Master, in which case you pick one of those 2 units to be a general. The only benefit a general has in your army, in that when you're doing list building, a general's regiment, which is a regiment is normally 0 to 3 units, becomes 0 to 4 units in the General's Regiment. Let me know what you think of Gobsprakk. I haven't even mentioned his melee output, sorry. You shouldn't really be sending this guy into melee unless it's a dire situation. He's got a Demon Finger Staff that's got 3 attacks hitting on 4s, wound on 3s, no rend and D3 damage, but it does have anti-wizard and crit mortals. Killer Beaks, the Killer Beaks Talons and Beak have got 7 attacks at damage 2, which makes it doing more damage than a Tree Lord. And the Killer Beak Stinger is 1 attack that does D6 damage and crit mortals. So in the right situation, especially because it's got crit mortals, and there is a way to give, because it's got crit mortals, I think there's a way that you maybe could spike some damage, but its survivability is fairly low. You want to be really cautious about throwing this into combat because the reason it exists is to shut down enemy spells. Next unit we're going to look at is also a wizard, and this is a Swampcalla Shaman with a Hobgrot. It's got 6 health, a 6-up save, and it moves 5 inches. Now, obviously, its combat profile isn't important because the reason it's here is as a supportive wizard. That's why it's here. And that level 1 wizard is okay, but obviously, you're going to be able to give it an additional cast thanks to the artifact that we talked about earlier. It's got 2 different abilities. The first one is Hobgrot, where this unit's Hobgrot is a token, and you add one to the casting rolls for this unit while its Hobgrot is on the battlefield. Now, other tokens you can lose really easy. By the first time you roll a 1 on a save, you're going to lose the token and therefore lose a lot of your ability. However, the way you lose the Hobgrot is if you make an unmodified casting roll of a 4 or less for this unit, you remove its Hobgrot from the battlefield. So the fact that you can have a Shaman, and I don't know how cheap the Shaman is, but I assume it's cheap. The fact that you can have a Shaman that's level 2 with +1 to cast is incredibly good for the Kruleboyz force. In addition, it has a once per turn across the army ability, so if you have multiple Shamans, you can't do it more than once. And you've got the ability in your hero phase to pick a friendly unit, friendly Kruleboyz infantry unit, wholly within 12 inches, and use the foul elixirs. You roll a dice, and on a 3+, you add 1 to the save rolls for the rest of the turn. On a 1 to 2, you allocate D3 damage points, and ward rolls cannot be made. Now, +1 save is really nice. One of the disappointing things about this ability is that you add 1 to save rolls for the target for the rest of the turn, as in that turn, because you do it in your hero phase. So that's not the battle round, and it's not till the start of your next turn. So as soon as your opponent's turn begins, that ability is going to remove, which is a little bit disappointing. I guess the purpose of this ability is so that you can use it as a countercharge mechanic. So you put a big unit of, Gutrippaz on an objective. You know that your opponent's got Kragnos or Archeon or whatever right in front of him, and he's planning on doing a big countercharge, into your unit. Well then, why don't you want a 3-up give you +1 save? Ultimately, it's situational because it's infantry, situational because it's a 3+, and it's also done in your turn. Therefore, I can't see it having much utility. But a Shaman is great because it's able to cast spells, and your spells are good, and you can improve it to a level 2 wizard, which is great. So overall, Swampcalla Shaman got the stonks. The next unit we'll look at is the Murknob with Belcher Banner. Got 6 health, 4-up save, boost 5 inches. Looks like he'd enjoy a milkshake. He's got 4 attacks in combat with crit mortals, which is legit fine, to be honest. Doesn't have a ward save, obviously. His main job is that he's got the passive Power of Kragnos, where friendly Kruleboyz units have a 6-up ward save where they're wholly within 12 inches, which is not bad if you can stack a lot of wounds, like a ton of Gutrippaz with a 6-up save. 6-up ward saves only become mega effective if you can have a lot of wounds. And then finally, in any combat phase, which means every combat phase, he can use the Breath of the Miredrakes, where you pick each enemy unit in combat with this unit to be the target, Pick each enemy unit. It's pretty decent. Roll dice on a 1, this ability has no effect. 2 to 5, it's a mortal damage. On a 6, you inflict D3 mortal damage. This is legit stronger than some monsters' rampages, which are also dice dependent. And this is done in any combat phase, and then for every unit in range. So this guy could literally be like tanking and then just doing mortal wounds in AoE. This could be really, really good, especially if it's cheap enough, because it brings enough utility to your army in that 6-up ward save. It really depends on how many bodies and wounds you're putting on the board. The next unit we're going to look at is the Killaboss on Corpse-Rippa Vulcha, which is a monstrous melee character that can do some pretty significant mortal damage. 14 health with a 4-up save makes it survivable enough, but lacks a ward save to really push it into the upper echelons of what I would consider to be a monstrous duelist character like you would see with something like a Bloodthirster. It's fast, though, which is great, with move 12 and control value 5, so I can definitely see one of these, if it's cheap enough, ripping around onto different objectives and lifting up little infantry units that are maybe trying to cap those objectives. In combat, it's not too bad. 5 attacks on the boss on top with 5 hitting on 4s, wound on 3s, rend 1, damage 2, doing crit mortals. And then it's got 7 attacks hitting on 4s, wound on 2s, rend 1, damage 2, and then 1 attack, which has again got crit mortals, but does d6 damage, which I think is quite nice. You can, if you take them in the right sub-faction, have exploding 6s, or what we do, crit 2 mortals on those 7 attacks, which is a lot of attacks to do that with, which is quite interesting. And the reason you're going to take this, if not for the role I just described, is because of their Vulture dive, which you can do once per turn in any charge phase. If this unit charges this phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 1 inch of it to be the target. You roll a number of dice equal to the unmodified charge roll, and for each 4+, you can inflict 1 mortal damage on the target. Let me tell you, 12, if you roll a big 2 6s, you get a 12, you can do 6 mortal damage on the charge. But the combination of abilities that you can do here has got me actually very excited about this unit. Let's talk about those. So I charge in, I do my mortal damage. I love that. Then what I'm going to be able to do is, if I take the right trait that we talked about earlier, on a 3-up, I'm going to be able to get out of combat. If it's a unit that's particularly scary, then countercharge in my opponent's turn. If I don't want to do that, and instead what I want to do is charge in, do the mortal damage, and then also fight, what I can also then do is do a power through, because I have a high wounds characteristic, which is a command ability I do at the end of the turn, move forward, get out of combat, and then countercharge in my opponent's turn again to keep rinsing and repeating. If I was to put the Slippery Scumbag ability, which is the 3-up retreat, on this guy, then I could do these multiple interactive movements, either electing to, well, hopefully roll on the 3-up to make a retreat, or electing to fight, do power throughs, and maybe doing a mixture of all of those things to make this unit be a real problem to pin down, which is actually quite spicy. And then every time this unit charges in, it does some mortal damage. That's actually that's really fun. You're going to be committing a lot of command points to make that happen with this unit. So the rest of your army is going to have to bring its weight on its own and not rely on the command points to do so. But I think you could have a really fun and engaging unit doing all of those things. The next unit we're going to look at is Swampboss Scumdrekk. He's a unique hero and a monstrous hero that's going to make Hobgrot Slittaz insane. Let's talk about what he does. He's got 15 health with a 4-up save that moves 8 inches. So as a melee character, he's got a good health pool and an okay armor save. But don't forget, there are ways to potentially add +1 to this save. You've got those strike last mechanics that you can do. There's teleports. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. Anyway, moves 8 inches, which is a little bit slower maybe than you would necessarily need for a real true combat piece. But he's fine. In combat, he's got 5 attacks, damage 2 with crit mortals. And the mount has got 6 attacks, again, damage 2 with crit mortals. And don't forget, if you take it in the sub-faction, you could have crit 2 hits. But I think that they wouldn't stack. Oh, no, sorry. You can have crit 2 hits. It doesn't have crit mortals. I apologize. I read companion. It doesn't have crit mortals. And then Slop, Claws, Bite. So the mount has got 1 attack. That does D3 plus 3 damage, which again is a companion attack, so it could have crit 2 hits. So it's kind of interesting as a combat piece. He's not going to do a one-punch knockout blow to another monster. Maybe he's even going to struggle to fight elite heavy infantry like Brutes as an example, because the rend is pretty low, only rend 1. So pretty interesting profile. Instead, it feels like what this guy does is be a support combat character to a unit of Hobgrots. Now, in the deployment phase, you can use the ability Counting Crew, where you pick a friendly Hobgrot Slittaz unit within this unit's combat range to be the target. For the rest of the battle, the target's Slitter knives have crit mortal where they're wholly within 12 inches of this unit. This means any 60 hit is going to do a mortal damage equal to their damage characteristic. And just so you're aware, Hobgrot Slittaz are a unit of 10. They can be reinforced to a unit of 20, and each one has got 2 attacks each. So that means just with this character, we're going to be able to have 20 Hobgrots, which are definitely very cheap. And they're going to be able to have 40 attacks with any 6s doing mortal damage. That's incredibly impressive for what will be a really cheap unit. In addition, he's got another ability done in the deployment phase called the Bet Master, where you pick an enemy unit on the battlefield to be the bet. You add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by this unit and friendly Hobgrot Slittaz that target the bet. And then he also has a rampage, which is done once per turn in the army at the end of any turn, called Aggravate Wounds. And you pick an enemy monster in combat with this unit to be the target, and you roll a number of dice equal to the number of damage points the target has. For each 5+, you inflict 1 mortal damage on the target. Unlike some other abilities we've seen, this is not capped. So if you did end up in combat with, let's say, a Mega Gargant, it's done at the end of the turn, so he's going to have to survive, which is a big question mark. But if he does survive, he's going to be able to do a ton of mortal damage to some big wound models, which is pretty spicy. I think one of the reasons you bring this, as long as it's cheap enough, is to buff up a big unit of Hobgrots and also be itself its own unique kind of combat piece. The non-named version of Swampboss Scumdrekk is the Snatchaboss on Sludgeraker Beast. With 14 health and a 4-up save, moves 8 inches, control value of 5. It is going to fulfill a similar combat role as Scumdrekk in that it's fast enough and can fight smaller units, but isn't going to go toe-to-toe with some of the big major threats in the game. That's pretty nice because it means it might avoid some like focused damage delivered to it, which is cool because it's going to be able to bring some pretty important buffs to your army. The main reason you're going to take this unit is because in your hero phase, you can use Sludgeraker Venom, where you pick a friendly non-hero Kruleboyz unit wholly within 12 inches of this unit to be the target and roll a dice. On a 2-up for the rest of the turn, you add 1 to the damage characteristic of the target's weapons that have crit mortal, and on a 1, inflict D3 mortal damage on the target. Now, this is going to work. So rolling a 1 is going to suck. However, you can take multiple of these and be able to buff more than 1 unit with this ability. Obviously, things like Gutrippaz are going to have crit mortals, so you're going to be able to do a lot of mortal damage. As we already know, you can use a sneaky trick, and you can make one of those units do crit mortals on 5s. Where I think this is incredibly funny is the Hobgrot Slittaz that we just talked about, is you can also make them do damage to crit mortals. So you can have a unit of 20 Hobgrot Slittaz doing 40 attacks with crit mortals that are damage 2 on 5s. Also, this is going to stack really well on your regular Gutrippaz, and the fact that you can buff more than 1 unit is impressive. The fact that it's only for your turn as well means it's not quite as obnoxious. So only in your hero phase until the end of your turn are you going to be able to add 1 to the damage characteristic. But you're going to be able to have a very aggressive melee turn. In addition to the Sludgeraker Venom, you have a rampage for this unit called Festering Wounds, which is done at the end of any turn. You pick an enemy unit that had any damage points allocated to it this turn by this unit's combat attacks, and you roll a d3 on a 2+, you inflict an amount of mortal damage equal to the roll, and that is not locked to it being a monster, so potentially d6 mortal damage is great, and you can subtract 1 from the wound rolls for attacks made by the target until the start of your next turn, which is also good because that's a very long debuff that you can apply to a unit. So I love that. I think that the Snatchaboss and also Scumdrekk working together, very much like we've seen many of these kind of centerpiece models being something that they're really focusing on, where if you take both at the same time, you're able to stack these buffs, but they're not dependent on each other because you're always going to take the Snatchaboss, but Scumdrekk's going to mean you can bring yourself, if you want to, a bunch of Hobgrots to fulfill a different role. Maybe both of them will be overkill, but it's quite a fun and engaging rule set, and I really like what they do. The Killaboss on Great Gnashtoof is a melee support character, but a smaller one than some of the other ones we've seen, with 10 health, 3 up save, no ward save. Fairly fast, moving 10 inches, control value 2, is pretty okay in a fight, with 4 attacks, damage 2, which do have crit mortals, and then 5 attacks from the mount, which are also damage 2, for 9 attacks, which are damage 2. But they're only on the low rend one, so they're not going to go toe-to-toe with anything super important. I think the reason that you're going to bring this unit is because of its passive. That's ours, you gits, where while this unit is contesting an objective that you do not control, you add 1 to the rolls for combat attacks made by friendly Kruleboyz infantry wholly within 12 inches. I think Games Workshop have put a lot of stake into these +1 to hit auras on some units, and I feel like the points cost of this isn't going to be enough, as it's situational, because you need to be contesting an objective you don't control just for +1 to hit, and all-out attack is right there as a command ability. The other ability it has is all part of the plan, which in your hero phase you pick another friendly Kruleboyz unit wholly within 9 inches of this unit to be the target, add 3 to the target's control score until the start of your next turn. So that's only +3, which is like having 3 units on the board, sorry, 3 models on the board. You have to be wholly within 9, and it's only 1 unit. So I don't think this guy does enough for the whole army to really be worth taking. So the final Killaboss is a Killaboss on foot, but he's got a Stab-Grot with him, so watch out. He's got 6 health, 4 up save, which is an okay profile for a little foot character. 5 attacks with crit mortals that do damage too, it's fine. And Stab-Grot Shiv, 2 attacks, they also do mortal damage as well, which is fun. The reason you're going to bring this model, if you bring it, is because of his reaction ability when you declared an all-out attack command for a friendly Kruleboyz infantry unit. If this unit is wholly within 12 inches of the unit using the all-out attack ability, you can also add +1 to wound. That's obviously great if you're going to be doing a ton of attacks, like with a big unit of Gutrippaz. But you're probably hoping to get crit mortals on that unit of Gutrippaz anyway, which means that the +1 to wound is slightly less effective because less attacks are going to make it through to the to wound step, because hopefully you're critting a lot. But either way, like, it's like not bad. Maybe you bring this guy along with the other unit of Gutrippaz if you haven't brought another Sludgeraker to buff their crits as well. But you know, if it's cheap enough. The fun thing with this guy is he's got a little Stab-Grot, and you can throw the Stab-Grot at the enemy and poke their eye out. The Stab-Grot is a token, and if the Stab-Grot has been used up, he won't be able to use the Stab-Grot Shiv ability, okay? But you are going to be able to use once per battle the Unleash the Stab-Grot, Pocket Sand, Pocket Stab-Grots, where once per battle in any combat phase, you can pick one of the following effects. You pick an enemy unit in combat with this unit to be the target. You inflict D3 mortal damage on the target. This unit has a 5-up ward save for the rest of the turn. After resolving either effect, you remove this unit's Stab-Grot from the battlefield. The 5-up ward, who cares about? You're only ever throwing the Stab-Grot because throwing the Stab-Grot is hilarious. So yeah, I like this. If he's cheap enough and it works in your army, great. The last hero we're going to look at, the best hero we're going to look at, is the Breaka-Boss on Mirebrute Troggoth. Now, the Master Blaster of Age of Sigmar is a melee monster that's fairly slow. Not too bad if you're looking for like a unit that's going to be in a toe-to-toe combat. 12 health with a 4-up save, but obviously isn't going to be able to go toe-to-toe with God models. Moves 5 inches, which is slow, and control score is pretty rubbish. Now, his combat attacks feel pretty medium until we start talking about all the buffs. First up, the Rider has got the Bident Goad, which has got 5 attacks that are damage 2 that have crit mortals. And the Mirebrute's clubs have got 4 attacks. They hit on 4s, but they're wound on a 2, they're Rend 2, and Rend 2 is the kind of secret sauce here, because there's been a lot of Rend 1 in the army, and they're damage 3. Now, the reason I'm quite excited about this is because in any combat phase, you're going to be able to use the Breaker Harness ability, where you can allocate D3 damage points to this unit, and you can't make ward rolls, and then for each damage point allocate to this unit by this ability, add 2 to the attacks characteristic of this unit's Mirebrute clubs. What this does mean is this Mirebrute's clubs can go up to 10 attacks at damage 3. If you take a Breaka-Boss, which is a monster, that's got the companion line, in the sub-faction where you have crit 2 hits on companion weapons, this means you can have 10 attacks with crit 2 hits doing damage 3. That feels like a lot of attacks, and it feels like a lot of attacks that can do a lot of damage. In addition, I know you're going to be worrying about taking damage. 12 health is a pretty stonky wound pool, to be honest. You're going to be able to regenerate 3 at the start of any turn. Heal D3 to this unit. In conjunction, if this unit isn't in combat, with the ability, of course, to be able to use Rally. And because it's got a pretty high health pool, I think you're going to be okay for doing Power Through, which is all based on the health characteristic on being able to move a unit. Lastly, it's got an ability once per turn across the army where you tear limb from limb, where you pick an enemy infantry unit within 1 inch of this, you roll a dice. If the roll exceeds the target's health characteristic, one model in this target unit is slain. So the ability to auto-slay a unit. Now, I'm not going to lie, the first thing I looked at immediately is like, can I run 8? And I reckon you can. And is that going to be the best list in the world? I don't think so. But because I need to check their base size, actually. If their base size is good enough, you might be able to run them in like triptychs, so like a 3, like in a triangle, so that if anyone ever gets in contact with one, then they get in contact with all 3. I'm not sure if that works because of the 3-inch fight aura. I'm going to have to check. But either way, running multiples of them, I think will be very fun because you'll be able to do a load of damage. And specifically because the Breaker harness, the ability to add the attacks, isn't going to be once per army, so it's usable by every single one. It's not brilliant running multiples of them, but it's pretty good, and I really like the Breaka-Boss. So cool unit. The first unit that we're going to look at that's not a hero is going to be the Marshcrawla Sloggoth, which also fits in the support role as a unit. It's got 10 health with a 4-up save and move 6 inches, and it's got a nominal combat profile that's not that important. Also, talking about survivability, at the start of any turn, you're going to be able to heal D3 to this unit, which is pretty nice. That's a lot of healing over the course of a turn. But the reason you're going to bring this is because of the passive On the March, where, while this unit is wholly within 12 inches of this unit, while a unit is wholly within 12 inches of this unit, for any Kruleboyz infantry can use charge abilities even if they run. So you're giving run and charge out in a 12-inch wholly within aura to all of the Kruleboyz units. That's pretty nice if you want to push your army really fast, really quick. It does feel like some of this army really works around those heroes providing support. Therefore, I'm not certain you necessarily want it to run away. Do you want to run at the enemy and shut down an aggressive gun line? I'm not sure. You do have your own missile weapons to bring to bear, and you do have your own fast units like the Corpse Vulcha guy, which is pretty interesting. But like, maybe you do necessarily want to run in charge with everyone. We'll have to see. It does mean you get to do retreat and charge, which is pretty interesting because when you do the redeploy ability, that counts as a run, and normally you aren't going to be able to redeploy and charge. But this opens up redeploy counter charge, which could be pretty spicy when you interact that with the ability to do dirty tricks. So yeah, not too bad, but obviously you're going to bring this for a specific reason. Gutrippaz are your main battle line infantry unit. They are 10 models, and each model of the unit has got 2 health, and they've got a 5-up save, and they move 5 inches. So they're a little bit slow, I guess, as a combat unit, but they're pretty much what all infantry units are. I would say that Gutrippaz are a sum of the buffs that you can place upon them rather than themselves, absolutely excellent. So their attack profile is 2 attacks each, hit on 4s, wound on 3s, because it's got no rend and damage 1, but is importantly crit mortals. And the way that you're going to improve this unit is not to add rend to it, is instead to improve its mortal capacity. We know that we can make crit mortals happen on 5s. We know in addition to that, we can make it so their damage characteristic becomes damage 2. And we know that you can have 2 units, so you can reinforce this unit of 10 up to a unit of 20. This does also mean that that's going to be 40 health in this unit. We also know that there's at least 2 different ways to add +1 to their save, even if they're not necessarily over the entire battle round, but that still feels pretty impressive to me. And there's no battle shock in Age of Sigmar 4. In Age of Sigmar 4, you have to do all 40 damage to kill all of them. And the problem with that is these guys have also got the ability to do dirty tricks against charging units to make them strike last, where they'll strike first. These things genuinely scare me. They have got a lot of attacks. A reinforced unit of 20 will be doing 40 attacks. Okay, they also can get a 6-up ward save near a Murknob banner, which feels pretty decent in my opinion as well. So good. They also have in any combat phase the passive where you roll a dice on a 3+, you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by non-hero units that target this unit for the rest of the turn. This is a great unit. I'm assuming they're going to be like a little bit expensive because you have got so many things that you can do with this unit. This unit isn't designed to work on its own, like maybe a Breaka-Boss, and instead it's designed to fight. You can also give it run and charge and some other stuff. So I think Gutrippaz fans are going to be, and Kruleboyz fans are going to be super happy at the sheer effectiveness of this unit. The next unit we're going to look at are the Kruleboyz Monsta-Killaz, which is the Warcry warband, and therefore it's a unit that's not going to be reinforceable from its 8 models up to 16. So instead, you can only have a unit of 8. You can have multiple units of 8 if you want. Each model of the unit has got 8 health with a 5-up save and moves 5 inches, and it's got a control value of 1. I guess the important news is that they've got 3 attacks each, hitting on 4s, winning on 3s, but they do have rend 1, damage 1, and they have still got crit mortals. So, you know, for a piece which really there to do its tech buffs, the fact that you've got some additional crit mortal damage is pretty nice. Now, the reason that these are really good, and I think we'll probably see constant play in a Kruleboyz army, is because of both of the abilities I'm going to talk about. The first one is done in any combat phase, which, say it with me, means every combat phase. You pick an enemy monster, and I personally think there are going to be loads of monsters in the game because of them having loads of allegiance abilities baked into them. Roll a dice and you add 1 to the roll if the target is damaged. On a 3+, which means 2+ normally, a 2+ with the extra bonus, the unit has Strike Last. So this is our second Strike Last that we have in the army now, and this one is specifically targeted to monsters. And that's great. That's great, because that's going to be before anyone swings any fight abilities, so that's really nice. Lastly, once per turn reaction ability, an opponent declares a rampage ability for an enemy monster within 6 inches of this unit. So if an enemy monster is like, I'm going to do a rampage, on a 2+, that rampage does not work. However, on a roll of a 1, the Sludgeraker is removed because it's a token, and therefore you won't be able to do the ability again. But 2+ to shut down rampages, 3+ or 2+ to give a monster Strike Last feels wild in what we're probably going to go into as a meta. I think these guys are an auto include. Next unit we're going to look at is also an infantry unit, and it's a unit of Hobgrot Slittaz. They are 10 models in the unit, each one with 8 health and a 6-up save. So they're not really designed for long, extended fights, which is pretty nice because of the ability that they have, Scrap Bang, which you do at the end of any turn. You pick an enemy unit in combat with this unit to be the target, and you roll a dice. On a 3-up, you inflict a mortal damage, and this unit can immediately use the retreat ability as if it were your movement phase without any mortal damage being inflicted. This is pretty spicy for doing things like battle tactics, getting this unit out of the way, making this unit go and grab an objective, putting this unit in a better position to screen something later in the turn. All of these are, in my opinion, super effective. They've also got a shooting attack with the scrap grenades, which shoot 8 inches, which one attack, 4s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1, but you can shoot it to combat. And the Slitter Knives have got 2 attacks each, but we have talked about the fact already that you can do the most insane thing I can think of, which you can have 20 Hobgrot Slittaz, which I assume is incredibly cheap, have critical mortal hits on 5s that are damage 2. Teeny little fellas are going to be able to stab people and kill them. I can't tell you how excited I am about the Hobgrot Slitter meta because I haven't done the math, but I feel the fact that Hobgrot Slittaz could take out some of the scariest units in the game with that attack profile is wild. Yes, you got to do a lot of things to make that thing happen, but in the right situation, that's one of the most fun combos I've seen so far in Age of Sigmar 4, and I love it. The next unit we're going to look at is a unit of infantry missile troops. Man-Skewer Boltboyz are a unit of 3 models, and each model has got 2 health each with a 5-up save, and they move 5 inches. They've got a control value of 1, so they're not really there, and they're not really designed to grab objectives. Instead, they're there to provide covering fire for your army. I'm not even necessarily certain they're there to kill enemy units in huge quantities. It's just put a bunch of shots in at range. So you have 2 weapon profiles for these, and it talks about it in the passive where you pick one or the other. You either pick Man-Skewer crossbow hasty shot or the aimed shot. Okay, the hasty shot is 12-inch range, 2 attacks. They hit on 4s, they wound on 3s, they rend 1, damage 2. But I guess the big news is that they've got crit auto wound. So this does mean the ability to have crit on 5s could be a big deal on a reinforced unit. So 6 of these, doing 12 shots, any 5s to hit is going to do 2, is going to be an auto wound. The other version of this is an 18-inch shot, which is one shot, but it's Rend 2, Damage 2. In addition, you have a passive called Pick 'em Off, where if this unit is not used a move ability, which does mean you can still do a setup this turn, and was not set up this turn. And was not set up this turn, which means you probably won't be able to do a redeploy. Then you get +1 to hit rolls for the unit's shooting attacks for the rest of the turn. So +1 to hit, if this unit didn't move, is pretty nice. So it's going to be their long shot could potentially be 2s and 3s, Rend 2, Damage 2, with any crit auto wounds. Hopefully this unit is super cheap, and their job is not going to be to win games for you. Their job is going to be like soften up an enemy unit before maybe your big punchy units are going to charge in. And in one of the sub-factions, you can have +3 inches to the range, so 21-inch shot or 15-inch shot if you take in one of the sub-factions. So some okay range on these units. The next unit and the last unit is maybe the unit that's got me most excited. I think the whole Kruleboyz roster is great, and if you've made this far in the video, thanks for watching. But we're about to talk about the Beast-Skewer Killbow, and this is good for two different reasons. One, it's war scroll, and two, the situation it's being deployed into. First thing we need to talk about is the Beast-Skewer Killbow with the first thing we need to talk about is its health. 5 health, 5 up save, moves 5 inches, but don't move it. You don't need to move it. Instead, put it in the sub-faction that adds +3 inches to its range. It's a shooting war machine, and the reason it's so good is because of its Beast-Skewer bolts. They got 24-inch range. If they're in the sub-faction, you're going to add, to 3 of these, you can add 3 inches to their range, so 27 inches. 2 shots is what makes these really spicy. They hit on 4s, unless you don't move them or set them up that turn, in which case they can use the passive Pick 'em Off, where you add +1 to hit rolls. So if you don't move them, 3s, wound on a 2. They do have crit auto wound as well. They're Rend 2, in which case, unless they're shooting against a monster, in which case they're Rend 3, and they're D6 damage. Now, D6 is very swingy, I understand. But if they're cheap enough, I think even a unit of 3, or not a unit, but multiple models, and have 3 of these in your army, is going to cause such a nightmare for enemy monsters that this is a legit tactic. Most of the allegiance abilities that we're seeing in the armies, instead of being kind of part of the battle traits, they're locked into what monsters do. As an example, being able to have +1 damage to critical weapons is locked into a Sludgeraker. That Sludgeraker is a monster, and therefore you get an additional Rend. Also, once per turn in the army, and only for one of your Killbows, you can use a Skewering Bolts ability, where for the rest of the turn, the damage characteristic of this unit's Beast-Skewer Boltboyz is 6 if the target is a monster, which is pretty good. So I think these are good because I think they're good anyway, but I think they're good because of the meta they're going to be deployed into. I think they're much better than the Boltboyz. And there's got lots of monsters that are going to be in some real problems with this unit around. And I would probably be picking up 3, and I'm going to run an army with maybe 10. I think I should also obviously mention that Kragnos is takeable in this army, and one of the important parts to mention is that he gets the Kruleboyz keyword. Now, it's pretty funny reviewing Beast-Skewer Killbows and then Kragnos straight after, and then I've had a very impassioned conversation with the chat a second ago about the minimum amount of Killbows I think you should bring, which I think should a minimum be 3. And then Kragnos is a perfect example because he's so good in so many of the other armies, and even really good in this army where you could bring him along and you could make a bunch of your units. The important part about Kragnos, apart from the fact he fights really well and does a ton of stuff and has a spell ignore, is the fact that destruction units holding within 12 inches of him get to charge on 3d6 versus charging on 2d6, which means if you were to bring a Marshcrawla Sloggoth, you could have some units of Gutrippaz, let's say, or even some Sludgeraker beasts, although probably Gutrippaz more, be able to run and charge and then 3d6 charge up the board, which is a very, very fast and mobile army. However, the 3 Killbows on the other player's army are going to shoot him in the head and maybe kill him in a turn. And I think that's something to be conscious of with your army, because I think it's good. Anyway, I thought I should mention Kragnos exists. That is the end of the Kruleboyz review, and it's not the only video that I'll be making about Kruleboyz. I'll be making list videos, I'll be making tier list videos, I'll be doing a ton of extra content about the Kruleboyz. I think the army looks amazing. Just so you know, I've done this review after having just done the Sylvaneth review, and the differences between those two armies are night and day. That is not to be mean to the Kruleboyz army, the Sylvaneth army, but This feels very good. There's so many interactions that work really nicely. Some of those units seem really important, but some of them feel optional, like being able to do mortal damage, so 2 mortal damage instead of 1, from a Sludgeraker feels pretty vital to have in the army. But I would say no longer does Gobsprakk feel vital to have in the army to make it work. Gutrippaz feel really good, and Beast-Skewer Killbows feel incredibly good. It feels like even the Hobgrot Slittaz, with their ability to 3+ bammo out the way, have got some utility in the list. You've got some really nice interactions with your spell lore and be able to cast more spells. Manifestations we haven't even talked about and how they're going to interact. But ultimately, I think this is looking like an incredibly solid book. And I was saying to the people in the chat a moment ago, I am pumped. I would be really pumped for this army. I think you're going to have some incredible times. The sneaky tricks are so good. There's loads of options for Strike Last. You immediately, in my opinion, need to go pick up 3 Killbows, and you need to go and pick up the Warcry Warband with the little monster guys. Either one of those 3. I mean, I don't even know if you need the monster guys because the monsters might be dead. But either way, I hope you have an amazing time. Let me know what armies you're planning in the comments below. And thanks for watching the show. Thank you to everyone that also want Wargamer Patreon, where we've got a Discord, where it's full of people talking about stuff. So you should jump in. It's super cheap to get in there. And then thank you to all of you for watching my videos, I guess, and the chat and everyone else. Loads of love. I'll see you soon.